Today I thought it might be a bit interesting to go through some of my photos and edit them so you guys can see the process that I go through, learn maybe a couple of different tips and tricks. So we'll jump in here and start editing this photo of a fairy wren. Alright, so here we have a fairy wren. We're going to pull up the exposure, brightness just up a touch, and then we're going to come down to the highlights and shadows, up the shadows just a touch, and highlights also up. Actually, we'll go down a bit. White balance will make it slightly cooler, and now we'll bring in the black point. That's to give us a little bit more contrast again. So we're going to go into our detail refinement, which is our sharpness slider. We're going to zoom in and see the change happen. We don't really want to put a whole lot. Now we're going to go to our tones adjustments. We're going to add in a really small S-curve. That just brings out a little bit more punch to the photo. And then we're going to come into our brush overlay tool and put up the exposure a little bit, brightness, and then pull down our blacks. Now we'll adjust our brush size, zoom in, and then we're just going to paint it over bird. Now this will just mean that the bird is the brightest part of the image, which is usually where our eye goes to when we're looking at a photo. So it's not a huge change, but it is enough to make your eye want to go to the bird rather than anywhere else in the photo. Lightroom has a great tool, which it has like a auto select, which is great, but with Affinity I have to do it kind of manually. I'm also noticing underneath the bird we've got a little bit of a green color cast, but when we do that on the whole overlay that we've just made, it changes the grays a bit too magenta. So we're going to chuck on another overlay, put up the magenta, and so that's to go against the green. And we'll just paint that on the lower section of the wren. We've just gone up a little bit too far. So there we go. Now we zoom out. So now we've got the correct colour on the bird as well. Develop. I tend to like to bring up the catch light in the eye. It really starts to bring a bird to life. You're just kind of accentuating just a couple of the things that are already there. Not a great deal, but it really does bring it to life. And there we have it, a fairy wren. So now we'll jump into this shot of the ibis at the waterbird habitat. First off, we're going to start with a crop. I'm going to leave it with the original ratio. Bring in the edges. I'm wanting to make sure we've got that reflection at the bottom of the shot. Putting the left-hand trees on the edge of the shot and giving it space to fly into. I'm going to start by bringing down the exposure, and then I'm going to bring up the brightness only ever so slightly. Highlights we're going to bring down at this stage, and then shadows we're also going to bring down. So that's to create a bit of difference between the bird and the background. And now we're going to increase that black point as well. So now we've got a quite dark background. We can have a look at the sharpness and increase the amount, and then the radius. So that brings the sharpness to where I like it. Then we're going to go into tones, and we're going to create another small S-curve. Then we're going to come into overlays, decrease the exposure and the brightness, and increase the black point, or decrease the black point. Highlights down, shadows down, increase our brush size. And we're just going to lightly paint that over the kind of the brighter parts of the background to really kind of create a darker vignette around the edge of the image. Develop, and this is where a lot of Photoshop users will be more comfortable, but we're going to go into with the burn, with the dodge tool, and just the way that the light's catching, we've got a very kind of grey eye, so we're going to just increase the catch light just ever so slightly, and then we're going to burn around the dark sections of the eye. That just helps to bring the bird to life a bit more, and even though when we zoom out it's actually not that much of a difference, but to me it matters. And there we have it, a Australian white ibis in flight. Here we have an image from the waterbird habitat again. We've got a fair bit of action happening on the right hand side of the frame, but I feel like the more interesting composition is on the left with these trees and the dusky moorhen in front. We're going to start off with a bit of a crop coming in from the left hand edge, and then we're going to bring it in from the right, leaving about the same amount of negative space on both sides. Now we're going to bring in from the top side, and this is to remove the small little leaves on the top left. There's other ways to remove that, but the easiest is by cropping away. Cool, now we're going to go into our exposure, and we're going to drop it down, shadows and highlights. We're going to put the highlights up, shadows we're going to go down, and then we're going to come back to brightness, up a little bit, black point down, then we're going to go to our details, and I've got a preset for sharpness, and I also have a preset for the S-curve that we put in the last two photos. So now we're just wanting to create an overlay brush, and we're going to darken off any of those slightly brighter parts in the brighter parts that are behind the trees. So the black point is a bit darker, brightness down, and now we're just painting that through. We might create another brush overlay, but I think I'll actually go back, and I've noticed these lighter sticks behind the bird, and I've found that to be a little bit distracting. So we're gonna go back through and edit them just a touch, darken them off so they're not as bright. So now that we've done that, we're going to go to a different brush overlay. Now we're going to work on the dusky moorhen. So we're increasing the exposure, increasing the brightness, and then making our black point a bit darker. Highlights up, shadows up, and this is so we get a little bit more detail in those darker areas, and we get the bird to stand out from the background. as I mentioned before, there are selecting tools. With Affinity Photo, we don't have the luxuries, so I manually go through and paint it on. Now, as I'm painting on these this brush overlay, I'm noticing that the legs are a bit bright, and so once I've seen where I've painted, I'm going to actually go in and reduce the exposure just a touch. Cool. So now we're going to zoom back out, and I think we're good for this part of the image. So we're going to develop that and bring it into the equivalent of Photoshop. Here we're noticing, I've noticed a kind of mark on the left-hand side, and that's just due to some reflection. There's two ways that we can easily deal with it. One is the patch, where we select around it, move the cursor left and right to find a patch that we like, select, and Bob's your uncle. The other way we can do it, so I'll just go back. Now I'll select with the lasso tool. There is a shortcut for this, but the easy way is edit, fill, or we can go down to in paint. That's gonna take a part of the image nearby and place it on top, but as we can see, the lighter patch is just a repeated pattern from nearby. So we're actually going to select both of those, and we're going to do the exact same thing again in paint, and then as we zoom out from here, we won't even know it existed. And with that, we've got our image of a dusky moorhen at the waterbird habitat. Well, that was a few photos from the last couple of days. I look forward to hearing feedback about this video, whether you think I edit too strongly or not enough. If you believe I could push the images a bit further, I'd love to hear it. But thanks for watching, and we'll catch you guys in the next video. Awesome. Cheers, guys.